This is the Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 21st chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Peter turned and saw John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus didn't say to him that he would not die, but he said, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If any one of them were written down, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
As I was growing up and going through middle school and high school, I would rate myself as a fairly average student. I was never in the honors classes. I was never a straight A student. I got lots of B's. And I was okay with that. I was pretty happy just to kind of coast along in the middle of the road somewhere, getting by from grade to grade. And I remember specifically one class, my very senior year of high school, that really caught my attention. I really dove into that class, and I worked harder in that class than in probably any other one that I took throughout my entire educational career to that point. And that class was physics. Probably not the one you thought I would say. But it really was. It was this physics class. And in my high school, physics was an interesting sort of class, because for all of the major classes in math and in science and in English, there were honors courses available to students who were in the honors track. And I didn't take any of those. But for physics, there was just one class. There was Physics 1 in the fall and Physics 2 in the spring for anybody who had taken enough math to make it up to that level. So I found myself in the fall of my senior year in Physics 1, and I looked around, and it was all of the smart kids in my grade. All of the honor students were there in the same class with me, in many cases for the first time. And there was something about physics that just kind of clicked for me. Well, I never did really well in the math classes that lead up to it, and the algebras and trigonometry and all of that. The moment I realized that I wasn't just trying to find a random x, but that the numbers actually meant something. The numbers were the acceleration of a car or a train. Once I could put it into a certain context and say that these numbers actually exist somewhere out in the world, they mean something, it changed everything for me. It changed the way I looked at the problem. It helped me fix a lot of simple mistakes. And I actually did pretty well. It got to the point that by the second semester, some of the smartest kids in my class were asking me for help on their homework. It was really kind of an exciting thing for me, and I really dove into it and I worked on it. But it's because I could relate it to what was going on around me that it really helped me dive into the subject. And maybe you can't relate to that very well. Maybe physics isn't your thing. I can understand that being the case. But I think for all of us, there's some subject or hobby or sport or something that we're passionate for. And I think if we think about why that is, there's going to be a piece of it that says the reason we love this thing is because we can see what it does in the world around us. We can see it at work right now. If you talk to someone who really loves history, they don't think about it as something that happened a long time ago. But they'll tell you that knowing history helps them to understand the world today, and they can see what's happening right now in a new light, in a new lens. For people who love literature, the stories that they read aren't just about the pages there and the story on the page, but it's about larger themes that affect the real world. It's about things like love and adventure and bigger concepts that go beyond just one book. For so many of us, whatever that passion might be, there's a piece of it that connects to our lives today, right now. And I think that's the key idea that John is getting at as he writes the last bit of his gospel. That's the part we have read for the day, the last bit of the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John was probably, we think, the last gospel to ever be written and to put together. And so as John was putting all of these together, these stories together and writing this up, it's many years after Jesus has been here and gone. And so he's facing questions from people around him. People are wondering if Jesus' story still matters, even when some of Jesus' disciples are dying off, either being killed or of old age. People are wondering if they weren't even alive when Jesus was around, if this story can still matter to them. And so as John writes the last bit of this gospel, he says something really amazing. He tells the story of his own time with Jesus. He talks about how he's connected to this gospel story. And then he says, and yet there are so many things that have yet to be written down. There's so many stories that are not included here that the whole world could be filled with the books that we would write. And I think that's John's way of saying to the people around him that the story of Jesus is bigger than the words on this page. It's bigger than the time period that Jesus happened to be with us. He's saying to all of these people that the story of your lives and the story of your connection with this place and the people around you, that is every bit as much of Jesus' story as the things that are in the Gospels. He's talking to all of these people and he's trying to give them a way to be a part of the story, a way to see Jesus Christ at work right now. I think that's the message that John would have for us today if John could be here. I think there's no difference in the message at the end of the Gospel of John to the Christians at that time than there is to us. You see, even though we live 2,000 years later and a world away from the stories of the Bible, Jesus is still at work. In our lives and in our homes, in our workplaces, again and again and again, the stories of Jesus at work in the world are being written. When we gather here in a place like this, what we come to do, at least when we get our job right, is to come together and learn to see God at work right now. We learn to look out at a world that, even though it's full of death and destruction and terrorism and all of the horrible things we hear about every day, we come here so we can have a chance to look out at the world and see God at work. We see God at work in strangers meeting on the street and smiling. We see God at work in new babies being born among us. We see God at work in our families and in our friends and all of those connections we make. We see God at work every single day. Because when we get our jobs right, when we go out into the world with these new eyes that see Jesus all around us, we begin to see that those pages of those books that John talks about do fill up the earth. They fill up the earth with each of our lives, each day writing a new story, a new piece of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The good news right here and right now. Amen.